Delmarva Today with Don Rush.
The town of Selbyville grapples with growth. A look at the new top environmental official in Maryland. We pass them by, often without much notice. They are the homeless. We'll explore their lives, a new book entitled Silent Voices. Welcome to Delmarva Today. This is Don Rush. The growth in Selbyville has been picking up speed, with its population rising from about 2,200 3 years ago to over 3,200 today. Median value of owner-occupied property stands at around $335,000, and development has been growing at a steady pace. On the phone with us is Susan Canfor, reporter for Coastal Point. Welcome to the program.
Thank you, Don.
So how is that town handling this kind of growth? We've got annexations going on. What's happening there?
Yes, the town of Selbyville continues to grow with new residential developments and annexations that increase the size of what used to be a little Eastern Shore town best known for strawberries. It was once the strawberry capital of Delaware, and also very well known now for Mount Air Farms chicken processing plant there in Selbyville. There are now plans to create voting districts in Selbyville. Up until now, voting for the town council has always been at large, and now they're talking about creating voting districts so that populations in different parts of the town are equally represented by the council members. Last fall, the town council tentatively created those districts, and they agreed to develop a resolution to amend the town charter as they drew those lines and made those creations. Again, because of the town's growth, there is a change from the longtime policy of being elected at large. There's also talk about adding a council member or two in years to come to accommodate growth. Although the council wrote a resolution to amend that town charter, it was not passed during this year's Delaware General Assembly. It should be back on the agenda next year. I talked to the mayor, Rick Duncan, and also I talked to Delaware Senator Gerald Hawker, and they both told me it wasn't passed. The districts were not passed this year because there were still some questions about how to exactly draw those lines, and because there are a couple of new members on the council, they were unfamiliar with the change, and they needed some time to learn more about it. This year, longtime Mayor Clifton Murray retired, and Councilman Rick Duncan took over as mayor, and two new councilmen, Gary Steffen and Chris Snyder, were elected to replace outgoing council members. So they wanted to give all three of them. Rick Duncan's been there a long time, but he's mayor now, so his role is a little bit different. And they wanted to give him and the two new council members enough time to create those districts and determine exactly what it will mean for the council and for the voters. And also, Mayor Duncan told me that he felt the matter was pushed too quickly to be fair to everyone, and Senator Hawker agreed with him. So we will expect to see that discussed again during the 2024 Delaware legislative session, and most likely it will be finished and those lines will be drawn. And we'll see this growth continue. No doubt we might see a larger council. There are five members on the council right now. We might end up seeing 7 in years to come as they have more to do, more annexations and more decisions to make as the town grows, more developments come into the town, more HOAs, and they're now talking about giving the final approval to a mixed-use development area, which will bring businesses and residences, next to each other and within each other, and that'll certainly cause more interest in the town and the town to grow. So we're going to see a lot in Selbyville in the months and years to come, Don.
Do we have any sense about what that might mean in terms of these separate districts for the council? I mean, at large, obviously, they're being elected now. Do we expect then that might create a more, say, diverse representation on the council in terms of various areas? What are we looking at? I mean, how might that change the council, do you think?
There probably still will be. Most of these councils in this area here in Delaware, most of them have at least one council member that still is the at-large. He represents the council, or he represents the town at large. But the other ones will most likely the other council members will most likely represent the town in different areas. Of course, most of the growth in Sussex County is in the eastern section, and it's the same way in Selbyville. That's where most of the developments are being built, in the eastern section closest to the ocean, of course, where everybody wants to live. So whoever has that district will certainly have a larger population. But what they're trying to do by drawing these lines is to make it equal with all the council members, so the council members have an equal number of residents. So that will certainly be a challenge because that eastern section has such a large population. So we'll see them working to draw those lines. And they're planning to use experts at the University of Delaware. There's a program there that does district voting districts for voting at the University of Delaware. There's a program that's done it for other towns, including, I think, the town of Ocean View. So they're going to incorporate them and ask them for their expert advice as they do this. Because it will take it's going to take some planning and certainly some insight and foresight to be able to make those districts equal as far as population goes. And they'll be looking at, the census and the population as it continues to grow to make sure it's equal for everyone. I think it'll be a little bit of a challenge.
How has this growth affected the character of the town, these annexations? How has it changed it?
We're not seeing a lot of change. I still see pretty much the same downtown, the same kind of slow pace. And with the local people, I've covered the meetings for years, and I see the same kind of discussions. But among the developers and architects and people who develop these huge developments with 700, 200 homes, different phases of single-family homes, well, we see a larger pull on the sewage system, more water being used. There's talk about a new water tower. So the infrastructure is certainly being affected. And every time the town annexes another section into the town, and of course the town grows, the lines of the town grow as these areas are annexed. Sometimes people will be at the meetings, and they're very open. They allow anybody to speak. They have a section of the meeting where they introduce people who are in the audience and let the locals ask questions. It's unlike anything I've seen in any other council meeting. It makes it very homey and very welcoming. And sometimes people will say, we don't want all these annexations because little Selbyville is going to grow too fast. And the town administrator, who's Stacy Long, who's been there a long time and is very knowledgeable, she usually tells them, look, you want us to annex because if we don't do it, the county will do it, and the county allows more units. There's more density when the county allows it. So you'd rather have Selbyville do it because we can keep it under better control. So that we do see.
Because one of the things, finally, on this effort, it does strike me that the more and more people that you get annex into the city, that's going to change not simply the character, but the voting base itself, that you're going to eventually find, say, people who have been there for a very long time being outvoted or certainly outmaneuvered by other people who've just moved there. I mean, it does sound like there might be some shifting going on there.
Well, yeah, we're seeing that already a little bit. There are two new council members, both of them. I don't think either of them was from Selbyville, which is a big change. Everybody on the council has been a Selbyville resident with, generations and generations of Selbyville residencies for many, many years. Now we're seeing some new people come in from other areas with new ideas, different ideas. And those ideas are, they're fresh ideas, and they're generally welcomed by the sitting council members. But I think you're right. I think we'll see some big changes as new ideas come in from metropolitan areas. But so far, everybody is getting along well, and everything has been, seems to be calm and under control in Selbyville. I haven't seen any controversy like I see in a lot of towns, a lot of other towns that I cover. I haven't seen anything like that yet, and I hope not. I hope not to. That's one of my favorite towns to cover. It's really a nice little town. The people are so welcoming and accepting. They're kind of stunned by this growth. Even the council members say, we've never seen anything like this before. We're trying to keep up with it. We're trying to stay informed and, bring experts here to talk to us. So they know it's coming, and they're preparing for it. But we're definitely going to see a boom of growth in Selbyville.
I want to turn to Indian River, where the government has promised that it would do some dredging. I think there was some $51 million that was committed to water projects around the state as part of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers from the federal government. What are we looking at? I mean, is there dredging going on or promises of dredging going on? What are locals saying?
Yes, there are. We saw some dredging in White Creek and Ocean View last year. There was some controversy about how much of White Creek they were going to dredge, and the dredge was pulled out. Then DENREC brought the dredge back. And we're seeing almost identically the same thing except for where it's going to be dredged in Indian River, in Millsboro. The boaters there often take their vessels out onto the Indian River. And there's a section of that river near Cupola Park, which is a very, very nice, homey park in Millsboro, that badly needs to be dredged. Boats are getting stuck there. Recently, I heard from two Millsboro boaters, Jim Phillip and Jim Malloy, both who got stuck in the mud in their boats. Mr. Malloy was stuck for more than 2 hours and had to call a towboat company to get him loose. One towboat came and was a regular boat, and it got stuck. So they had to get that boat off the sandbar and call in an airboat, which kind of like skims the water with a very strong it propels the boat with a very strong push of air. So it kind of glides over the water. And that boat was able to get him loose. He was out in his pontoon boat with his wife and their daughter and their grandchildren. And he wasn't too pleased when I talked to him about being stuck out there for more than 2 hours. So I called DNREC, which is Delaware's Department of Natural Resources, and I talked to Mike Globetti. He's a gentleman who handles community relations for DNREC. And he told me there's a widespread sedimentation over a section of the Indian River near Millsboro. And DNREC Shoreline and Waterway Management Section is working on plans for a small-scale dredging project there within the next year, and then a larger-scale dredging project more than a year from now. Mr. Malloy and Mr. Phillip were very pleased to hear that, but Mr. Malloy said it still kind of puts a damper on your day. Both men also said the green markers, the guide boats, are off. They're not quite right. Apparently the markers shifted with the sandbars and the mud that collected in the waterway, and they're no longer guiding boats in the right direction. Mr. Malloy, who lives full-time in Long Island, said he was so frustrated when he and his family got stuck that he considered selling his Millsboro home, which is a summer home. He changed his mind later when he calmed down, but he said several other boaters in that area are also getting stuck, and they're very eager to see that waterway dredged. So there is a promise from DNREC that it will be done by the end of this year, at least part of it, and then dredging on a larger scale next year.
Well, in terms, by the way, of these promises, can they come soon enough for these people? I mean, they've been told that that's going to happen, and it seems as if there's been these delays.
No, I don't think it can come soon enough. And DNREC has its own schedule, and they're not always easy to deal with, certainly not from a journalist perspective. They don't always get back to you. They don't always write back or email back or call you back when you ask them to. And they have their own agenda. You know, they do what's best for them, and they say, you know, they'll be there and they'll help, but they do it on their timeline. So they pretty much just have to wait. The boaters just have to wait. One of the boaters I talked to said, you know, if they would just change the markers, even if they just put up a sign and say these markers are off, or don't depend on these markers, or put the markers where they belong, even that would help. You know, change those green markers to where the water can be navigated and not where they're going to get stuck in these sand dunes. The one good thing is that one of the boaters said his boat was not damaged because as soon as, I guess I'm not a boater, but I guess the engine kicks up water in the back. And he said he turned around and looked and it was kicking up mud. So he knew this was coming, and he pulled the motor up. And there was no damage to his boat because it was on soft mud. So that's one good thing. So he knew what to do. He knew what to look for, and he knew what to do. But he was very frustrated. He said, I was just ready to sell the house and just go boat somewhere else. So it's an ongoing problem. And they have about 30 neighbors in their area there, in the residence where they live. And a lot of them are boaters. And I also heard from several of them. He said the same thing. We can't keep doing this. You guys are going to have to do something. So, no, it can't come soon enough. You're absolutely right.
Finally, I want to turn to a new book that's entitled Scrubbing In 125 Years of Surgery at Tidal Health Peninsula Regional. It's by Dr. Nevins Todd, the oldest living surgeon to practice at the hospital. I guess he turned 90, I guess it was last year. And he's written this book. What can you tell us about what he has to say?
I spent some time with Dr. Todd the other day, and I found him to be absolutely delightful, a real gentleman. We met for lunch, and he was accompanied by his lovely wife, and we met. He's 90 years old. He's a retired cardiac surgeon. His grandfather founded the original hospital in Salisbury. At the time, it was called Peninsula General Hospital, or PGH, as all the locals called it. And that's what I remember it as when I moved to the shore in the mid-1980s. Later, it was renamed Peninsula Regional Medical Center, and then in recent years, it was renamed again Tidal Health Regional Hospital. Dr. Todd has recently published this book, Scrubbing In 125 Years of Surgery at Tidal Health Peninsula Regional. It's about 100 pages with a lot of photographs and detailed information. There's a history of the hospital in the book, details about the surgeons and the specialists. There are chapters on robotics, emergencies, administration, nursing, cardiac care. Dr. Todd is a retired cardiac surgeon, or as he called himself, a chest surgeon. And I had to ask what that meant exactly, and his wife said he means cardiac. But I guess in his day, that's what it was referred to as a chest surgeon. At the beginning of the book, there's a passage written by Nevins Todd Sr., and that's the author's father. The senior Todd, who was also a doctor and the son of a doctor, wrote that, in part, he wrote, "Who would dare to say that we do not need a hospital? What do you think would have been said in 1900? Those were the horse and buggy days. When Father talked about building a hospital in those days, people thought he had a pipe dream. No doubt they knew he did not have the money to build one. I believe the townspeople at large little understood Father, yet seldom he started something and left it unfinished. And then he explained that his father rented a small house on West Main Street opposite of the old BC and Steamboat Wharf in Salisbury. And that was the official start in October 1897. The head nurse, he said, was Miss Perkins, and Miss Kelly was her assistant. But that house was soon outgrown, and a hospital was necessary. So the senior Todd talked to a prominent lumberman in Salisbury named Mr. Jackson. And he said, what's this I hear about you wanting to build a hospital? You know you don't have the money to do that. And the senior Todd said, I'm going to do it. I'm going to find a way. So Mr. Jackson said, how about if I build it for you? And he said, that's wonderful. And by now, of course, you know, the hospital has grown by leaps and bounds. Dr. Todd that I talked to, Dr. Todd Jr., Nevins Todd Jr., said his grandfather wouldn't believe it if he were alive today. He never got to meet his grandfather, who died the same year he was born, but a few months earlier. But all these years later, Dr. Todd is the oldest living retired surgeon from Tidal Health. He said he was concerned that the history of the hospital, the history particularly of surgery, would disappear if somebody didn't write about it. So he wrote the book. And he said the hardest part was finding living survivors of some of the former doctors who have died and telling their stories. And sometimes he had to wait a month or so until they got back to him and told them exactly what they remembered. One of them, he said, was only like 5 years old, and he said, I can't help you, doctor. I was so little I don't remember what my father did. But many more did remember and told their stories about their fathers and grandfathers and aunts and uncles. One interesting thing is he mentioned that in those days when he was an early surgeon, in his early years, anesthesia wasn't very good. So they had to do surgery as quickly as they could so they didn't run out of anesthesia. And, of course, it's much different today. He also was talking to me about in non-invasive surgery and how that has changed this whole surgery world so much and how much better it is for the patients. One of Dr. Todd, he and his wife have 3 children. One of them is a doctor, William Todd. He's the emergency room doctor at Tidal Health. And he wrote a segment of the book, and he said there was no emergency room or accident room, as it was called, at the hospital until 1943. By 1950, there was a separate emergency room. One had been established, and it was very busy and bustling, but it was still called the accident room. So it's an interesting book, a lot of pictures, a lot of details, a lot of history, especially for people who are from Salisbury. The book costs $39, $39.95, I think, and it's available at the junior board at the hospital. And Don, very interestingly as well, Dr. Todd is in his 90s working on another book, and this one is an autobiography, and he's very excited about that. He shows no signs of slowing down, just a remarkable man with a very interesting story to tell.
As a matter of fact, and this is also not his first book, as I understand it.
That's right. He did write another book before this. This book, I think it was the first book he used his father's notes to write. It had never been written, and he knew that his father had notes that they were put away in a drawer somewhere, and he got them out and he turned that one into a book as well. So his wife said he's not real happy about being in retirement, even though he's 90 now. I said, do you do anything else? Do you have any other hobbies? And he said, yes, I play golf. And I said, are you good at it? He said, no, right away. He said, no, but I started in my 80s, so I really haven't had a chance to really develop much of a game. But just a delightful man. It's very interesting to talk to. And his memory and his articulation are just almost perfect. So I really enjoyed him.
We've been speaking with Susan Canfor. She's a reporter for Coastal Point, and we appreciate you stopping by and chatting with us this afternoon.
My pleasure. My pleasure, Don. Thank you.
You're listening to Delmarva Today. This is Don Rush.
Delmarva Today with Don Rush.